Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee. I'm Representative Priscilla Giddings from District 7. You know, I was walking up the hallway the other day with all my budget stuff, and it was Representative Vanderwada who stopped and said, "It looks like you're loaded for bear." And I thought it was quite humorous, and so as I brought all of this today to be ready for your questions on this print hearing, that made me think of that. So this morning I'm going to be presenting RS 28233. Quick summary for those who are listening and haven't seen it. It's relating to budgets in Chapter 35, Title 67, so that's related to state government and state affairs. We had to add a new section that would require that appropriation bills for state institutions of higher education are separated. And running through, that's pretty much the essence of it. A couple things I can point out. I know in committee the other day somebody was concerned about whether or not the titles of those universities should be capitalized. I think that's a new standard that the drafters are using, so that is correct. And then I did put an emergency clause on there just so that that could go into effect as quickly as possible. Okay, so now let's get into a little bit of the backstory. So I had asked the page to provide a handout to committee members, and I'd like to just walk through a few of these things. Overall, this legislation, I think, is just a new perspective on helping us increase transparency on these budgets. So the legislature has a responsibility to hold universities accountable for following their core mission. And when we look at the way, I want to just try to focus on the numbers at first here. So the graphic on the left of your paper, I threw it together last night, and my amazing office staff of one, I just wanted to put some perspective on the budget stuff here. So please, let's talk through it. And these numbers are a little bit of a mixture of last year's budget and this year's budget request. So these numbers are not gospel truth. There's a little bit of room for difference based on what you're looking at. But from the beginning, so this is out of the legislative budget book. The pie chart it's this year's budget book, but it's for last year, so fiscal year 21. And this is just the general fund pie chart. So when you're looking at the totals, these are not including the, some of the numbers up at the top of the pie chart is state funds. And then when you add in federal funds, that's where you get your bigger amounts down at the bottom. So just talking about the general fund, we've got our public schools. We have about 16 appropriation bills that K through 12 are split up into. And then you look over at Health and Human Services, that's split into 11 bills. The Law and Justice Department, about 6 bills. Then that other education, it's about 5 bills. I think included in there is for your community colleges and your health education programs and the ag research extension. Those have kind of been divided off. And then you look at the colleges and universities budget, and it's all one bill. And that bill, when you include the federal money, is $623 million. That's the request. So looking at the number of the amount in these bills that we pass as a body, so last year we did about 120 appropriation bills that went through the House and the Senate. The largest bill that we vote on is the Medicaid bill. It's about $3 billion. That's all in one. Now there are other Medicaid bills that are additional expenses, but the biggest one is that $3.1 billion. Our second highest amount is our teachers, K through 12 teachers, and that's about $1 billion when we vote on it. And then our K through 12 operations, about $685 million. And then, so the fourth largest bill that we vote on is for colleges and universities, right there at about over $600 million. So a couple things to keep in mind is that when the budget requests come in from the colleges and universities, they all come in separately. And then we have one budget analyst who has to consolidate all into so that it can be put into the budget book. So I think one of the reasons this is kind of coming to the forefront, last session, kind of quickly jog your memory, there were a couple of the college and university budget. It came through the first time and it failed, and then it went back to JFAC, it came back around and it failed again, and then it was the third time that it came back around that it passed. So when you do a kind of a walk down memory lane, when you look at the budget specifically on why they failed, it really comes down to just two things, and one had to do with the occupancy costs, and each university is treated differently, and because all four were pulled together in kind of one line item, LCSC was being treated differently than Boise State, so there was an increase-decrease change. And I know I'm already into too many details here, but just lightly. So that was one of the things that failed, and there was kind of a problem in it wasn't comparing apples to apples, and so that was a portion that got changed. And another part that was incongruent was the enrollment workload adjustment. So enrollment numbers were quite varied between like LCSC and Boise State. And so those increases and decreases weren't matching up. And so some of that the budget going back and forth, really, if you look at the base of it, it's because you can't compare the apples to oranges. And that's really, I think, a lot of the essence where we come back to, let's just separate these four budgets. And, you know, these four colleges and universities, they have different missions, they have different fees, they have different needs, they have different population bases, and it would be easier if we can separate them out. So that's kind of a look at the, I think the budget perspective of it. Then you kind of start to get into some of the other concerns where some of these, the universities are drastically impacting the curriculum, and we're not seeing quite a similar occurrence at the colleges. And so how do you address that? That's kind of the lingering, where we as the legislature have that accountability to make sure that they're following their mission. So I point to a couple things when we talk about their curriculum. One is that the universities have started mandating some graduation requirements that have questionable content. Back to your handout, you can see the middle diagram was just sent to me the other day. You can see it was a mandatory seminar for University of Idaho law students held on February the 8th on how to be anti-racist. Kind of some inflammatory language. There are multiple foundations courses that are required, where we also have some very questionable content. And we're getting a lot of feedback from students willing to testify, to share their experiences. I know I've had students talk to me about the tunnel of oppression, a terrible thing that they were being told was a graduation requirement. I did follow up on that, but I won't go into that. So you have these graduation requirements. And then you have the additional, the inflammatory language on that third graphic. That was, you know, from my phone, a screenshot of that website. And the concerning word for me there is the supporting. And is taxpayer money paying for that support of that organization? So when we look at these budgets, the question, you know, how can you pinpoint some of this? And we have dug into their budgets, and I can say, I guess it's kind of a side note, but with each of the universities, if we were to say there's a direct linkage to some of these concerns, I'd say some of it could be wrapped up in about, or some of the questionable content. I think there's about $1.6 million spent on questionable content at BSU, about $700,000 in questionable content at the University of Idaho, $200,000 at Idaho State, and then $100,000 at LCSC. So this bill is hopefully my goal is to try to simplify the budgeting process, increase transparency of these budgets, and then provide some flexibility when we're addressing the individual concerns of each of these universities and colleges that have very different needs. You know, historically back in the 60s, their budgets were separated. And then they, the entire education budget got conglomerated into one. And just a big pot of money was just sent over to the State Board of Education. And it was, I want to say back in 11 or 12, and then it got split again. And I think it was even Speaker Bedke who had a vital role in dividing the K through 12 budgets. So when you look at that chart where it turned into 16 bills, I think that can be traced back to Speaker Bedke. And that, you know, the premise behind that was just increasing transparency there. And so I would say this is kind of my my attempt to try to bring some light to this. I think we can divide it up into a few more bills, and then that would help us achieve our goal and our role in the legislature is helping them to follow their core mission. So with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Representative Giddings. Does the committee have any questions for Representative Giddings?
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm right here.
Oh, excuse me, I didn't see. Representative Palmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Giddings, I just wanted to thank you for bringing this. Just yesterday, I had one of my constituents come to me and say, what can we do to rein in the colleges? And to me in particular said, what can you do? And what are you doing about it? And I said, right now, all I can do is vote on their budgets, and they're all one budget. And I had no idea this bill was coming, and so it's with pleasure that I would request that we introduce RS 28233.
Thank you. Any further? Representative Scott.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Comment? Representative Giddings, thank you for bringing this. This is a good two-prong approach. You did a good presentation. I like the fiscal ideas, and I hate the indoctrination requirements that are being part of this. And I have one constituent who contacted me. She was a junior at BSU, and she went through the tunnel of oppression, as they call it, and it was required for her. She's an English major, A student, and she walks through this tunnel of oppression where other students are screaming the F word at her and anti-Trump things for whatever reason. And she was so disgusted that she quit at the end of her junior year. Now, she has a successful career elsewhere, but that's the kind of garbage that I want to stop. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Any other question? Representative Hanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not for a question, but I also appreciate you bringing this forward because we are all concerned about education, and as taxpayers, we and those whom we represent have been really concerned about this, and this visual that you have here is great, and I'm sure you probably have more to present, so thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Representative Mathias.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. I have to concede that I have not done my homework. Chairman Crane gave us our budget stuff earlier this week. I'm only about halfway through it. But can you explain to me why we are talking about the education budget? Even though we're not talking about specifics, I feel like I needed to have a little bit of background in order to make an informed decision here. Can you just explain that to me? There's things I obviously don't know, but if you could just enlighten this freshman, I would appreciate it.
Thank you for that question. Representative Giddings, can you explain why they assigned you to the State Affairs Committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Matthias. The most basic answer I can give you is this section of code that this piece of legislation is impacting is titled State Government and State Affairs, because it's about how we run bills and through this building. It's not, even though it is about their one specific particular I guess subtopic, the actual language in the legislation is related to state affairs.
Thank you. Representative Furness.
Just for a comment, I appreciate this bill. I think it's awesome. We can look at those bills separately, but I'd like to address Representative Matthias's question, and it's hypothetical and theoretical, and because I really don't know the answer, but I would think that this is not about an education budget. This is not about where dollars are being spent. This is simply about separating those budgets and allowing us to look at those budgets individually as a body. And so we're not talking about how much they're spending. We're not talking about how much they're not spending. We're not talking about how much their increase is or what their budget items is. We're just talking about separating those budgets out so we can look at them individually. And I would think that's why it's come to state affairs.
Thank you, Representative Furness. Representative Matthias.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Furness. That is helpful. I guess then that in order for me to make an informed vote, I have to come to some conclusion about the extent to which the discomfort of some of our constituents means that this is a good idea. And I guess I'm not prepared to do that. I will say, I could go down a long list of the times that I was not comfortable. And these institutions didn't come to my aid. They didn't spend any money to help me. I'm looking at these resources on the handout. You know, Black Lives Matter, I understand that when social movements get big enough, there's always going to be criminal components that attach themselves to it. President Trump gets popular enough, criminal components are going to break into the Capitol. Black Lives Matter marches get big enough, criminal components are going to attach themselves to it. I support Black Lives Matter. Do I support violence and hate? No. But I agree with the fundamental proposition that if you have dark skin in this country, you're probably going to get locked up at a higher rate. You're going to live in a house that's not worth as much, and for that reason, your school isn't going to be as well funded. I mean, I really struggle with this, and I appreciate Representative Giddings bringing this, but I don't know if this is the best way to approach systematic discomfort among some of our constituents. So I'm not sure how I'm going to vote today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Matthias. One thing might help you a little. The beautiful thing about this process is that we get to hear Representative Giddings explain this, and then we have this hearing, and all this hearing does is, do we want to hear further? Do we want to actually have people come in here and testify? And I have some questions that some concerns. I'm from Pocatello, and the ISU president, I asked him about this, and he was clearly opposed to the idea. And I'm interested in to find out how that is. But the only way we can really dig deeper in this is to vote on to have it introduced as a bill. And so whenever I'm questioning what how I feel about that, I always vote to. I'm not trying to just influence your vote, but I'm just saying that I always like to hear more rather than less on something like that. But Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just wanted to comment that It's important to remember that I believe in around 2007, 2008, the universities, the 4 universities in college, were getting, the 3 universities in college were getting about $285 million in general fund money. Today, it's only $307 million. The total budget is $623 million. Most of that is coming from tuition and also grants, research grants, things like that that they get. So I would suggest that, and have the issue addressed when Representative Giddings returns. The rationale for controlling everything in the university budget, if you're not funding the university budget. If it's not funds that are coming from the state, then how do you tell the universities what to do with other funds? So that would be a concern that I think, at least at hearing, that I think that should be discussed and addressed.
Thank you. I'm not sure that there was a question there, but did you want to comment on that?
Mr. Chairman, I think I can maybe just add a couple things to a couple of these concerns. Representative Giano was talking about kind of the comparisons and budgets, and I think at in a full hearing, I'd be happy we can like lay those out side by side so we can address that. I don't know that the amounts, even it is the 4th largest bill that we vote on. I'm kind of at a loss for words, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, we're putting the representative in a position to answer questions that have nothing to do with the bill. The bill is about splitting up budgets. It's not about budgets or anything, and I don't think we should be putting her in that position. I think we should either discuss what we're talking about. We are in discussion about a motion, or move on to the vote. And in fact, I would call the question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Representative Palmer. Question has been called. The motion before us is, should we introduce RS 28233? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay? We will introduce your RS. Thank you, Representative Giddings.